The gravity suit was not supposed to move that easily. It was bolted to the cargo bay wall on a wide metal hook, the same hook it had hung on for 3 years. The suit weighed 62 kilograms. It was built for Brull, the Grin engineer, who was the strongest member of the crew and proud of that fact. No one else on the Vorus crossing had ever taken it down without using both hands and planting their feet first. The new human took it off the hook with one hand while looking the other way. Laura saw it happen. She was walking through the cargo bay with a data pad, checking the load numbers before the ship departed the transit station. She looked up at exactly the wrong moment, or the right one, depending on how she would feel about it later. The human, Davin Reed, had the suit in his right hand and was reading a label on the wall with his left. He was not straining. He was not bracing. He was standing the way a person stands when they are holding a cup of something warm. He noticed the suit was hanging crooked, so he straightened it and put it back. Then he turned around and saw Laura staring at him. "Did I put it in the wrong place?" he asked. Laura could not answer. She walked out of the cargo bay and went directly to find Captain Sarek. The Vorus crossing had picked up Davin Reed at Hallow Station, a midget transit point that smelled like recycled air and old fuel. He had been waiting at the crew dock with a single worn bag and a confirmed contract. Sarek had hired him through the station registry because their previous cargo handler had taken a better offer 2 stops back, and cargo did not move itself. The galactic file on humans was short. Sarek had read on the trip over .it said they were a mid-sized species from a Class 3 world, bipedal, with a reputation for being adaptable. The file was 4 lines. Sarek had filed it away, without much thought. When Davin boarded, Sarek shook his hand, the human custom, and showed him around the ship. Davin asked practical questions. What were the shift hours? Where was the tools locker? How was the cargo organized? He did not complain about the size of his bunk. He did not ask about crew bonuses or shore leave. He just wanted to know how the work was done. Brull had watched from the engine room doorway with his arms crossed. All 4 of them. Grin had 4 arms, a wide-scaled frame, and a voice that sounded like gravel being poured into a metal drum. He had decided before Davin walked through the door that hiring a human was a mistake. "He is small," Brull said after Sarek finished the tour. "He is the size his species is," Sarek replied. "That is what I said." Wick, the Druvak navigator, had no such doubts. He was small and fast, and spoke at a speed that made most species tired just listening. He had never met a human before and had about 400 questions ready. He followed Davin to his bunk and started talking before Davin had even set his bag down. "Is it true your world has a full gravitational pull of 1.0? Is it true you have liquid oceans covering most of the surface? Is it true your species has 2 distinct sleep cycles? Or is it a different file I read? Do you have a preferred food temperature? Do humans—" "Wick," Sarek said from the doorway. Wick stopped. "Give him 10 minutes," Sarek said. Wick gave him 7. The ship's gravity plating was set to Thalvery standard. This was Laura's accommodation, and no one had argued because Laura handled the external cargo links and her fine motor work suffered in higher gravity. Thalvery standard was 0.6 of Earth's pull. When Davin stepped onto the crew deck for the first time, he paused. "Gravity is low," he said. Sarek nodded. "Thalvery's setting. Is it a problem?" "No," Davin said. "Just feels light." Laura, standing nearby, processed this. She lived her entire life at 0.6G. It was not light. It was normal. It was by most galactic standards already in the heavier side for her species. She had heard of 1.0G environments before in the same way she had heard of extremely hot places as something that existed somewhere for something else. She looked at the human again. He was already walking down the corridor toward his bunk, adjusting to the gravity the way someone adjusts to a slightly uneven floor. He was not bouncing. He was not thrilled by the lightness. He just walked. She filed this away. By the time the ship undocked and began its route, Davin had stowed his gear, reviewed the cargo manifest, and fixed a loose bracket on the secondary cargo rack that had apparently been loose for 2 weeks. He told Brull about it without making it a big statement. Just mentioned it. Brull checked and said nothing. which for Brull was the closest thing to a thank you. It was Laura who finally told Sarek what she had seen in the cargo bay, the gravity suit. One hand, looking away, Sarek listened carefully. Then he went to his quarters and pulled up the 4-line human file again. He stared at it for a moment. For lines felt suddenly very thin. Outside, through the corridor, he could hear Wick asking Davin about Earth weather patterns. Davin was answering calmly, one word at a time, the way a person answers when the questions do not surprise them. Sarek sat down. He had a feeling this contract was going to be more interesting than he planned. Wick found him at the 4th hour of the ship's night cycle. He had not been looking for Davin. He had been going to the cargo bay to check the temperature on a cold container that had been reading slightly off all evening. The bay lights were on their dim setting. Wick stepped through the door, looked up, and stopped walking. The gravity suit was off the wall. Davin was wearing it. He had it strapped on properly, chest plate, leg braces, shoulder frame, and he was doing slow, controlled squats near the far end of the bay. Not fast, not showing off, just moving down, pausing, coming back up. His breathing was steady. His face was calm. He had the focused look of someone doing something they had done many times before. Wick stood in the doorway for several seconds. He looked at the suit. He looked at Davin. He looked at the suit again. Then he turned around and went to find Brull. Brull did not believe him at first. The cargo suit, Wick said. He is wearing it. And squatting. Go check your container, Brull said. Brull, the cargo suit. Squatting. Come and look. Brull came. He stood in the cargo bay doorway with Wick and watched for a full minute without speaking. Davin finished his set, stood, rolled his shoulders slowly, and then noticed them. He raised one hand in a small wave. Brull said nothing. That suit was Brull's suit. It had been made for a Gren frame and a Gren body. Brull could carry it, wear it, work in it during heavy load operations, but he would never call it comfortable. It was a working tool, not something you strapped on at night for personal reasons. The weight of it alone required proper footing and both hands to lift from the hook. Davin reached up and unclipped the shoulder brace with one hand. He stepped out of the leg frames and lifted the whole suit back onto its hook. He was not breathing hard. He looked slightly warmer than usual, the way someone looks after a walk, not after real effort. He looked at Brull and Wick. The hook is a bit high for me, he said. I have to go on my toes a little. Wick made a sound that was not a word. Brull turned around and walked back to the engine room. He sat down on his work stool and stared at the floor for a while. At the morning meal, nobody brought it up directly. This was partly because Sarek was present and the crew had an unspoken habit of acting professionally in front of him, and partly because none of them had found the right words yet. Davin ate. He ate more than anyone else at the table, which Wick had already noted and logged. He had 2 portions of the grain mix, a full protein block, and something from his own bag that smelled sharp and fermented and made Laura lean slightly away. What is that? Wick asked, pointing at it. Preserved food from home, Davin said. Good for long trips. It smells like something went wrong, Wick said. It is supposed to smell like that, Davin said, and ate it without hesitation. Laura watched him from across the table. She had told Sarek about the gravity suit the day before. Now she was adding this moment to a growing list of things she was quietly collecting. She did not know what to do with the list yet. After the meal, Davin asked Brull about the engine configuration. He asked specific questions: coolant cycling, thrust variance on long hauls, how Brull handled fuel balance during route corrections. They were not beginner questions. Brull answered them because they deserved answers. He kept his voice flat and did not offer extra information, but he answered. When Davin thanked him and left to start his cargo shift, Brull sat alone at the table and did the math he had been doing since the night before. The suit was 62 kilograms. Ship gravity was at 0.6. That meant the effective weight Davin had been squatting with was roughly 37 kilograms in felt load. But Davin had come from a 1.0 G world. To his body, that 37 felt more like 22. He had been using a suit built for a Gren like it was light training equipment. Brull drummed his fingers on the table. He had 4 hands and drummed aloft them at once, which was a habit he had when something bothered him. He was not afraid of Davin. That was not the right word. But he was revising something, a picture he had drawn quickly when Davin first boarded, a picture he now understood was wrong in several important places. The cargo shift went without trouble. David worked fast and organized, asking where he was unsure and not asking where he was not. He helped Laura realign a heavy equipment crate without being asked, stepping in when she was struggling with the angle and saying nothing about it, just taking the side that needed more force and letting her finish the work on her end. Laura noticed. She did not say anything, but she noticed. By midday, Wick had started a personal file on his datapad. He had label edit, human, field notes, preliminary. He had 14 entries already. The 14th one read, ask him about heaviest thing he has lifted on Earth, important? Do not forget. He asked David that evening. David thought about it. A support beam, he said. Underwater. Me and one other person. He paused. It was a bad day. Wick typed very fast. The ion corridor showed up on Wick's charts 6 hours before they reached it. It was not dangerous. Ion corridors never were, not by themselves. They were just wide bands of charged particles that played with electronics if you were careless, and made cargo shift in its straps if you did not secure it properly. The standard response was to double-check every strap, every lock, every container seal before entering, and then again every few hours while passing through. It was not complicated work. It was just long, physical, and repetitive. Sarek posted the notice to the crew. The corridor would take 14 hours to cross at their current speed. All non-essential systems would go to low power. Cargo bay attention would be full during the crossing. The alien crew looked at the schedule. They would rotate in shifts, 2 at a time, trading off every 3 hours. It was the only reasonable way to handle it. David read the notice. He asked Sarek when his shift started. Sarek said, the first rotation. 3 hours, then rest. David nodded. He went to the cargo bay and started early. 3 hours later, the first rotation ended. The second pair took over. David was still in the cargo bay. Sarek came to tell him he could rest. David said he would stay a bit longer. There were still some rear straps he wanted to check. Sarek left. An hour later, David was still there. The second rotation ended. The third started. David handed Laura a tightening tool and pointed to the crate she needed toe check next, like he had been there the whole time, which he had. By hour 8, it was just David and Laura in the bay. She had been assigned the current rotation and had expected to work alone. Instead, she found David already there, moving through the rows with the same unhurried, steady pace he had started the day with. She worked beside him. After 2 hours, she had to slow down. Her hands were sore and her shoulders ached, and she was making small mistakes, fumbling with latches, losing her grip on the strap tensioners. She did not say anything. She just got slower. David noticed. She could tell, because he suddenly stopped assigning them the same rows. He redirected her to the smaller containers near the front, where work was lighter and the straps simpler. He did it quietly, like a shift in logistics, not like a favor. He just made a comment about needing the front section finished before the rear and went back to his end of the bay. Laura looked at his back for a moment. Then she finished the front section. Wick came in during hour 10 to do a mid-crossing check and found David still working. He stood and stared. You have been here since the start, Wick said. This was not a question. More or less, David said, not stopping. Ow, Wick said. David shrugged. Just keep going. Wick opened his datapad. He had been adding to his notes every few hours that he now had 31 entries. He added a new one. Does not seem to have be a stopping point. Investigate further. Then he asked David about his work on Earth. He had been building toward this for 2 days. David told him about underwater construction, deep water, high pressure, cold temperatures, long shifts in sealed suits because the water could not be ignored. He described a project that had taken 3 years and had involved working in conditions where a single equipment failure meant the crew had minutes, not hours. Wick wrote so fast his stylus made a scratching sound. You worked in pressure zones that would rupture salivary internal tissue, Wick said slowly. For 3 years. The pay was good, David said. Wick stared at him. That is your reason. That, and I was good at it. Wick put that in the notes too. Broll came to the cargo bay at hour 12. Not because he was assigned there, he just came. He stood near the door and watched David work for a while. David did not perform for him. He just kept doing what he was doing. After a few minutes, Broll walked over and started on a section of heavy crates that Davin had not reached yet. The two of them worked without talking for a while. This was, Laura noted from the doorway, the longest Broll had voluntarily worked beside anyone without either giving orders or making comments. At one point, Broll asked Davin what humans ate when they were working long days. Davin listed some things. Broll listened. A few items he had heard of. Several had not. One, the dried salted meat Davin described in detail, Broll asked about twice, because he could not understand how something could be preserved with that much salt and still be considered food and not a health problem. Davin said humans had been eating it for thousands of years. Broll was quiet for a moment. Then he kept working. At hour 14, Davin finished the last cargo strap in the last row. Hess stood up straight, pressed his fists into his lower back, and stretched. He looked around the cargo bay. Everything was secure. Everything was done. He said he was going to get something to eat. Above him, on the upper observation deck, Sarek had been standing for the last hour. He had not told anyone he was watching. He had just come to look. He watched Davin walk out of the bay, steady on his feet, the same as when had walked in at the start of the day. Sarek looked at the secured cargo, the straight rows, the tight straps. Then he went to his quarters and pulled out the full, unabridged human species file. Not the 4-line version, but the complete one that required a request to the Galactic Records office. It was 60 pages long. He had not known that version existed until tonight. He sat down and started reading. Page 1 of the full human file had a header note from the Galactic Records office. It said the document had been compiled from 17 different survey missions and 2 independent research teams. It said the information had been flagged as incomplete due to limited direct contact with the species. It said a file was updated most recently 11 years ago. Sarek turned to page 2. The first section covered basic biology. Humans were listed as a high-density bipedal species. Their skeletal structure was described as unusually compressed for their body size, built for an origin gravity of 1.0 g. Their muscle fiber density was rated in the upper tier for species of their mass range. Their cardiovascular system was flagged with a small star, which meant a researcher had added note. The note said, endurance capacity is a significant outlier. Human cardiovascular function is adapted for sustained output over extended periods. This is believed be an evolutionary trait related to persistence hunting. Sarek stopped. He read the last 2 words again. He knew the term. Most spacefaring species did not hunt. They had not hunted in thousands of years. The ones who had hunted in their evolutionary past had mostly done so in short, fast bursts. Chase, catch, stop. That was the normal pattern. It was efficient. It made biological sense. Persistence hunting was different. It meant following prey for hours. It meant not stopping. It meant the hunter stayed at a steady pace while the prey tired itself out, trying to escape. It meant the human body had been built over a very long time to outlast other living things. Sarek sat with that for a moment. Then he turned the page. In the common area, Wick had finally gotten Davin to explain Earth sports. This had been on Wick's list for 2 days, and he had been patient, which was unusual for him. He now had Davin sitting across from him at the table with a warm drink, and he was asking his questions in order, which was also unusual. Davin described weightlifting first, moving heavy objects from the ground toe above the head. Sometimes in competition, records were kept. Wick nodded and wrote things down. Then running. Long-distance running, not for transport, not to escape something, just to run. Races that covered 42 kilometers. Wick looked up from his pad. For what purpose? Davin thought about it. To see if you can finish, he said. Wick wrote this down with 3 underlines. Then mountaineering, climbing the tall geological formations on Earth's surface, which were in some cases several kilometers high, in low oxygen and extreme cold, using specialized equipment and a great deal of patience. Davin mentioned that some people did this without the equipment. Wick stopped writing. He looked at Davin. He looked back at his pad. He wrote it down anyway. Then he asked about combat sports. This took longer to explain because there were many of them. Sports where humans hit each other in controlled conditions. Sports where humans tried to pin each other to the ground. Sports where humans threw each other. All voluntary. All with rules. All popular. Somewhere during the combat sports section, Brawl had come in and sat down. He had not said he was listening. He was just suddenly there at the far end of the table, with the look of someone doing heavy calculations. Laura came in last. She sat beside David, which was closer than she had sat before. Wick noted this in his field notes under a section he had titled Crew Behavioral Shifts. She asked the question that had been on her mind since the cargo bay. Why do humans do these things, she said. Voluntarily, without needing to. David wrapped both hands around his drink. He looked at the table for a moment. I think, he said slowly, we like knowing what we can handle. Laura considered this. It was a short answer. It was also the kind of answer that opened into something larger the more you looked at it. Wick wrote it down verbatim and put a box around it. Brawl said nothing, but he had stopped drumming his fingers, which meant it had moved from bothered into something quieter and harder to name. Sarek came out of his quarters when the common area was full. He sat with his crew. He did not say he had been reading. He did not share all 60 pages that he just sat down and accepted the drink that Wick pushed across the table and looked at David the way a person looks at something they thought they understood and have now decided to think about again from the beginning. I'm glad you are on this crew, Sarek said. David looked at him. It was a simple statement. It had come out of nowhere. Thank you, David said. He did not ask why. He just accepted it in the same unhurried way he accepted everything else on this ship, without surprise, without drama, like it fit naturally into the day. The alert came 12 minutes later. Wick heard it first. His head came up from his pad, and he checked his panel on the wall. His expression changed. Distress signal, he said. Vessel in a high-gravity drift zone. 40 minutes from our position. The crew went quiet. Sarek looked at the coordinates on Wick's screen. Then he looked at his crew. Then he looked at David. He did not say anything yet, but he already knew that the 60-page file he had just read was about to matter. The drift zone had no color. That was the first thing David noticed on the scanner screen. Most regions of space had something: dust, light scatter, particle glow. The drift zone just looked like a place where the normal rules had quietly stopped applying. Sarek explained it to the crew in the navigation room. The zone was generated by a dense stellar remnant below their flight path that warped gravity in a wide band, fluctuating between 1.5 and 2.8 times standard galactic gravity with no predictable rhythm. The distress signal was coming from a small courier vessel that had drifted into the zone with a damaged navigation system and could not correct course on its own. Hull integrity was failing. Life signs were reading faint. 2 crew on board, Wick said quietly, reading from his panel. Sarek looked at each member of his crew. He did not want to say the obvious thing out loud, but he said it because his crew deserved the truth. None of us can enter that zone safely, he said. At 2.0 G, Wick and Laura face serious risk of organ compression and joint failure. At 2.5, the risk becomes critical. Brawl could manage higher than the rest, but the fluctuations would be unpredictable. A sudden spike to 2.8 while he was inside would be very dangerous. The room was quiet. David had been standing near the back with his arms crossed, listening. He straightened up. What does 2.8 feel like in practical terms, he said. Inside that zone. Sarek looked at him. For your body? Uncomfortable. Difficult to move fast, not dangerous. David nodded. I want the gravity suit, he said. And I need someone to help me calibrate it before I go in. I do not need it to survive in there. I need it so I can work faster and carry more. Brawl calibrated the suit. He did it without being asked twice. David put the suit on in the cargo bay and Brawl moved around him with tools, checking the joint support ratings, tightening the load distribution frame, adjusting the shoulder bearing so the weight would sit correctly. He had done this 100 times for himself. Headed it now for David with the same focus, the same care. At one point, he put his hand on David's shoulder and pressed down to test the frame response. He used about 40% of his grip strength, which was enough to stagger most things. David did not move. Brawl noted this without commenting on it and finished the calibration. The suit will give you extra stability at high gravity, Brawl said. It was built for load work, not rescue. You will be slower in it than without it. I know, Davin said, but I can carry more. Brawl looked at him. He understood what Davin was saying. He stepped back. Go, he said. The shuttle entered the drift zone at the edge, where gravity was sitting at 1.5 g. Davin felt it as a noticeable weight pressing down through his shoulders and legs. Not bad. He had worked underwater at equivalent pressure loads for 3 years. This was different in character, but similar in effect. He breathed slowly and kept his movements deliberate. The courier vessel was 300 meters ahead, listing to one side. At 1.8 g, the shuttle controls felt heavier. Davin compensated. At 2.1 g, a fluctuation pushed the number up without warning, and he braced against his seat and waited for it to level. It leveled. He kept going. He docked the shuttle on the second try. The first magnetic lock failed because a courier hull was warped. He repositioned and tried again, and it held. Inside the courier, the gravity was sitting at 2.3 g. The air tasted stale. Emergency lights were on. Davin moved through the narrow corridor toward the crew compartment, and the suit helped. The joint bracing kept his knees from taking the full load. The shoulder frame held his posture. He was slow, but he was steady. He found them in the crew compartment. 2 of them. One was a young Thalvarian in an emergency restraint chair, barely conscious, eyes half open. The other was a Druvak, older, unconscious, still breathing. The Druvak's body had curled in response to the gravity, a natural protective reflex. Davin checked both of them quickly. He had basic medical training from his construction days. Neither appeared to have critical internal injuries. They were suffering from gravity stress. Their bodies were not built for this, and they had been in here for hours. He took the Druvak first, got him secured across one arm and shoulder. Then he went back for the Thalvari and lifted him with the other side. The combined weight in 2.3 g was significant even for him. The suit helped hold his frame together. He breathed out, set his feet, and walked back the way he had come. At the door of the shuttle, a spike hit. The gravity jumped to 2.8. Davin stopped. He did not fall. He stood still, weight pressing down hard, and waited. His knees were bent low. His back was straight. He was not going anywhere, but he was not going down either. It lasted 11 seconds. Then it dropped back to 2.3. He finished the walk to the shuttle and got both crew members inside. The shuttle docked with the Vorus crossing. The cargo bay door opened, and Brawl was standing there. Behind him were Laura and Wick. Sarek stood slightly to the side. Davin walked out with the Thalvari over one shoulder and the Druvak supported against his other side. Both alive, both breathing. He walked them to the medical bay. He sat them down. He made sure they were positioned correctly and that their vital signs were being read by the bay system. Then he stepped back and took the gravity suit off, one piece at a time. When he came back to the cargo bay, Brawl was still standing there. Brawl looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something Laura had never seen him do before. He lowered all 4 arms, bent forward at the waist, and held it. A full grin bow, the kind given between equals who have understood each other completely. Davin looked at him. He gave a single small nod back. That was enough. The young Thalvari woke up asking where he was. His name was Orav. He was 19 years old, which was young enough in galactic terms that he had not yet completed his second crew certification. This had been his first long solo courier run. He had been awake for most of the hours inside the drift zone, which meant he had been conscious through the worst of it. The growing pressure, the failing hull warnings, the moment when the life support readings started dropping, and he had accepted, quietly and terribly, that this might be the way it ended. Now, he was in a clean medical bay with a working gravity setting and something warm in his hand that Wick had placed there without explanation. Wick told him what had happened. He told him about the distress signal and the drift zone. He told him about the gravity fluctuations and the shuttle and the spike to 2.8 that had held for 11 seconds. Then he told him who had brought him out. Orav looked across the medical bay to where Davin was sitting in a chair near the door, eating from a ration pack and reading something on a small personal screen. He looked like a person who had finished a shift. Orav stared at him for a long time. He had prepared himself, somewhere in the back of his mind, to meet something frightening. A hard face, a soldier's posture, some visible mark of what this person was capable of. Davin glanced up, noticed Orav watching and raised a ration pack slightly. "Do you want some?" he asked. "I have extra." Orav did not know what to say to that. Davin visited them both that evening. He brought food from the common area, real food, not just ration packs, and sat with them until they were steady enough to talk. The Druvak, whose name was Farron, woke in the late afternoon and spent the first hour asking practical questions about the courier vessel and whether it could be salvaged. Davin answered the ones he knew, and Say would ask Sarek about the rest. He did not talk about the rescue. Not once. He asked Farron how long he had been a courier pilot. He asked Orav about his certification training and what routes he was planning. He asked questions the way someone asks when they are actually curious, not when they are filling time, and both of them found themselves talking more than they expected to. At one point, Orav asked Davin where he was from. Davin named the planet. Orav had heard of it, but knew nothing specific. He said so honestly. Davin said that was fairly normal. Orav looked at the floor. "I read the Galactic file once," he said. "On humans, the IT was very short." "It usually is," Davin said. The last day before port, the crew had a quiet meal together. All of them at the same table, which did not happen often. Sarek had made something from a recipe he kept in a locked folder in his personal files. A dish from his homeworld that he cooked only when he felt something had gone well enough to mark. He put it in the center of the table without explaining the significance. The crew understood anyway. Brawl had, over the past 2 days, started teaching Davin Grin technical terms, not common ones. The specific vocabulary used in engine rooms on long-haul vessels, the phrases that took a decade to learn and were not written in any manual. That he did this gruffly and without ceremony, the way Brawl did most things, but headed it every time they were in the engine room together, and he corrected Davin's pronunciation each time until it was right. Wick read aloud from his field notes during the meal, which he had been doing every evening. The crew had started looking forward to it without admitting they looked forward to it. He read his entry on persistence hunting, which he had expanded to 4 paragraphs. He read his entry on the fermented food, which was mostly questions he still had not answered. He read his entry titled The 2.8 Spike, 11 seconds, which was the most recent and the most carefully written, and which ended with a single line. He stood. Nobody said anything for a moment after that. Laura was sitting beside Davin. She had been sitting there every meal for 2 days now, which was a shift that nobody mentioned and everybody noticed. She said, during a pause in Wick's reading, that she had been thinking about what Davin had said, about knowing what you can handle. "I think I understand it better now," she said. Davin looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "You do not push to prove something to others," she said. "You push to know something for yourself." Davin thought about this. He nodded slowly. "Something like that," he said. Sarek, at the head of the table, said quietly that in all his years as a captain had learned one thing more clearly than anything else. That the Galactic file son, most species were written by people who had spent very little time with them. He looked at Davin when he said it. Davin smiled and said the files on aliens were not much better. Sarek laughed. It was a short, warm sound that the crew did not hear often and always felt good when they did. At port the next morning, Orav and Farron disembarked. Their courier vessel had been marked for recovery by the station authority. Farron was already on his comm, arranging the next steps. Orav walked slower, carrying his bag, still slightly unsteady on his feet. At the end of the dock ramp, he stopped. He turned back. Davin was standing at the top of the ramp. He had come to see them off without making a thing of it, which was, Laura thought, exactly how he did everything. Orav looked up at him. He had been carrying a question since the medical bay, the same question that had been sitting in his chest like a stone. "Are humans always like this?" he asked. Davin leaned against the ramp rail. He thought about it properly. He thought about the people he had worked with underwater, about the ones who had stayed calm in bad situations, and the ones who had not. He thought about the ones who had carried others out of dark places and never talked about it after. "Some of us," he said. Orav held that answer for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, the way a person nods when they have received something that will take a long time to fully open. He turned and walked into the port. Davin watched him go. Then he went back inside. In the cargo bay, the gravity suit was hanging on its hook. He looked at it for a moment, then lifted it down with one hand, strapped it on, and started his morning routine. Somewhere above him, he could hear Wick typing rapidly, probably more field notes. He smiled and got to work.